Welcome to Prairie Hubtech. My name is Jessica Womack and I'm your host today. And we have an exciting episode for you. We're going to talk to a local CEO and learn how he's using weather to solve common problems. And Prairie Hubtech is located in Omaha, Nebraska. We're a STEM-based show and we're supporting STEM in the Silicon Prairie. Also, we're powered by Go Greenie, moms that eat your greens. And now it's time for cyber hygiene. So, 160,000 Facebook accounts are compromised per a day, and that comes from Education Connection. So Facebook, it's been around for a while. I mean, who doesn't have a Facebook account? But it's really important that we keep our social media safe. So let's talk about some tips. Number one, use multi-factor authentication to help protect your social media accounts. Now, multi-factor authentication is like a really fancy word, but basically it means it's double checking to see if you are who you say you are. So that's simple as an email being sent to you or a text message saying, hey, is this you trying to log in? We notice that you're logging in from a new computer, or we're noticing that you're logging at a time that you're not usually doing that. So you can set all kinds of different settings within Facebook to make sure that you are notified whenever a new login happens or when something suspicious happens. And tip number two, you can set your profile to private and manage information using groups. One of the wonderful things is that Facebook, they're really taking a proactive approach to make sure that you can manage your information due to different breaches and different information as well as scandals that has happened with Facebook. So now what they want to do is make sure that you have the power. So what you can do on your Facebook settings, you can set different groups. Maybe you have your family in this group, you have your coworkers in this group, and you have people that you are loosely connected to in another. That way you can tailor the information that is posted. And tip number three, what do we say? Don't talk to strangers? Well, don't accept friend requests from people you don't know. It's really easy. That's one of the ways that hackers are able to get so much information is they look at your friend list and they say, well, they really like these kind of people, or they really like these kind of groups. So let me go ahead and ask them to be my friend, or let me go ahead and send them a message. These are one of the ways that, especially for social engineering, this is how they're utilizing social media. So the number one defense is don't add anyone you don't truly know, or ask that they verify where they know you from. On LinkedIn, you can set questions that if someone met you at a conference or at a job interview or at a work site, they can actually say how they met you and why they want to connect with you. So that's it today for cyber hygiene. And you at home, please tell us, what do you do? I mean, social media is used so much, so how do you keep your information safe? Go ahead and add us at Cyber Ready in the Prairie or Prairie Hubtech. And welcome to Tech Support. And here with us today, we have a local CEO. His name is Eric Reichwaldt. And Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, Eric, tell us who you are and what is it that you do?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of a company called Shift Solutions here in town. We do a little bit of a lot of different things as a startup. So primarily we're a government contractor at the Air Force Base here in Bellevue. And we're also trying to grow our commercial capability right now where we're offering weather data as a service to people.
Wow, that's awesome. So when you say weather data, what does that mean for our viewers at home?
So, the National Weather Service puts out a ton of weather models. We pull in a lot of observations from different locations. We get data from satellites, from radar. There's just a lot of data that's out there. And a lot of it's made freely available to people, and you can download it from the National Weather Service and do things with it. But it's really a lot to look through and to dig through and to try and find meaningful information in it. So we try to make a more simplified way to access that data so organizations that aren't weather companies by trade can pull out the pieces of the data that mean the most to them, and then they can make better decisions with that information.
Wow, that's awesome. So this is very interesting. We've never actually had someone come in from your side of the industry before, looking at weather. So why would a company want to use weather as a data? You said people can use it, it's free, but sometimes it's not easily digestible. What can you actually use it for?
Well, it's really hard to get the statistics on it, but every year there's millions, if not billions of dollars that are lost in revenue or sales based on the impacts from weather to different kinds of companies. So it can be everything from a shipping company not being able to get to where they're supposed to go because they didn't know the road conditions were going to be hazardous, all the way to a retail store stocking the wrong kind of supplies because people aren't going to be buying that thing because of whatever the weather conditions are. So it has a really wide variety of impacts to different organizations.
Wow, so actually I have never thought about this, but now that you're saying this, I'm thinking, okay, if I have a business and I want to get my goods from California all the way to New York and it's January, I better know about the weather.
Exactly.
And what kind of things or impediments that my drivers might come across. So this is very interesting because if you're a business person, this might not be something that you're intuitively thinking about, but you said the military, at least they're thinking about that. So tell me about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I was in the Air Force for 10 years as a weather forecaster, and that's kind of the genesis for a lot of these ideas. In the military, it's not a foreign concept at all. So every mission that takes place has a weather briefing that's part of that mission. But we often pare it down to just a simple red, yellow, green sort of can I go or not, what we call impact slide for a commander, because at the end of the day, they don't really care what the weather is. They just want to know if they can execute whatever mission they're trying to do. And so that's the way we're trying to leverage technology to kind of help get us to those kind of answers. And again, let businesses focus on what they do the most and not have to think about the weather as much, but still be able to kind of exploit it to their advantage.
Wow, that's awesome. So let's talk about some of the challenges that you face while starting up. So you already have a history within the military, and as you just explained, they already know about this. This is something that's embedded within their culture, but you're also starting to branch out into the commercial side.
Yeah.
So let's talk about being a startup. What are the kind of challenges that you were faced with?
Yeah, well, I always tell people I don't think I'm a great example of how a startup, goes through its normal strife and whatnot, because we had that kind of niche experience on the base with that program, we were very fortunate to get onto that government contract right away, which helps kind of fund the research and development for the commercial work that we're trying to put together. So we haven't had to go through as many of the normal strifes that I think a lot of startups do in that regard, but it also does take away from our time to focus on those things. So I would say with weather being such a broad topic, one of the hardest parts for us has been figuring out who's the customer we should go after first, because we know that there's lots of people that need this data, but it's about convincing somebody that you didn't know you needed this information, but we're here to help you, integrate it into your systems and whatnot, and who is the best person to pursue first in that regard.
Well, I think you just touched on a pain point that a lot of people have. It's how do one, I have a product and I know it's a good product, but two, who am I going to get it to? And how do I convince them that they actually need this? So I think that's a really wonderful pain point that you're talking about. Then yes, on the military side, you're in a niche. So you know what you do and you do it well. But then on the commercial side, you're kind of coming across this. So that's very interesting that you're bringing that up. So when you're doing your startup, did you go through an accelerator, a fellowship? Did you just start by yourself? I mean, what did you do?
Yeah, no, again, we took kind of an unorthodox approach, and we really did just kind of start up because we had some connections with the government project that was going on. We had some history there. The three of us that started the company were working in different capacities, but we'd been working together in the past. And when the government opportunity presented itself, we kind of jumped on it and said, we need to take this opportunity while it's in front of us, and then we'll use this to leverage and kind of figure out how we're going to do the commercial stuff as we go.
So to our viewers at home, maybe they are in a niche market of their own. So what kind of advice can you give them to say, hey, take that next step? Start that idea, launch that business. What can you say to them? Yeah,
I mean, America is an amazingly simple place to start a company. A lot of the fear that goes into it is just a lack of information, and it's all out there. There's tons of organizations, there's government organizations, a small business association, a million meetup groups you can go to. There's no lack of resources if you want to do it. So don't hesitate, just take the opportunity and go find out, especially if you're in the software community. When we all agreed to kind of take that leap and start the company, we kind of joked that, the worst case scenario, we're just 3 unemployed software developers in Omaha, and that's not really a scary, situation to be in these days. So just take that first step and look for help along the way, because there's lots of people in those shoes.
Wow, well, thank you so much, Eric. It has been wonderful having you on the show. And you at home, don't go anywhere, because when we come back, Eric is taking us to Code Camp.
Hi everyone, I'm Andy Hoig.
Hi, I'm Paul Madsen.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Mi nombre es Saúl López.
KPAO Community Television, where Omaha talks.
Okay, so one of the reasons Jessica asked me to come here is that in addition to running my company, I also teach Agile 101 at Metropolitan Community College. I am a certified Scrum Master, certified Scrum Product Owner, and a PMI ACP, which is an Agile certified practitioner. And Agile is one of my extreme passions in the software community. So I have a fairly short time here to go through this, but I'm going to try and give you guys a primer on what Agile is in 10 minutes or less. So to start off with Agile, for folks that don't know what Agile is about or software development processes in general, we always kind of start off with the anti-Agile or the old approach, which is waterfall. So if you look at the screen here, you'll see that we kind of go through these 5 stages of the software development lifecycle as we used to know it, maybe up until 15 or 20 years ago. And they're very large chunks of time where we're taking a project and we're moving the entire project from one phase to another with every step of the way. So we're gathering every single requirement for the entire project up front. So we spend maybe 6 months on that. Then we go through and we design every single feature that the project is going to have, which maybe takes another 6 months. Then we send that over to the development team where the majority of the time is spent, and maybe they spend over a year, 18 months actually writing the software based on the design and the requirements that were given to them. Then we get to the testing phase. We spend another few months going through that and making sure that everything works as designed. Oftentimes it won't by this point in time. And then if you're lucky, you get into the maintenance cycle where you have to maintain that software. But oftentimes the requirements can change in the middle of the process. So you might be a year into the program and your requirements change, and waterfall doesn't really lend itself to going back and making those modifications. Also, we're not really collaborating during this approach. So the development team are usually locked away in their own little world for that 12 to 18 month period. And it makes it really hard for them to communicate with the customer or anybody that's going to use their software and to know if what they're building is the right thing. This is a very simplified way to look at waterfall real quickly, but this is kind of what a lot of organizations did prior to Agile becoming a little bit more mainstream. Back in 2001, we had 17 kind of prolific software developers who were working on various what would become Agile frameworks, and they wanted to get together and kind of come up with a more unified vision of what we needed to change in the software community as a whole to make it a better process. And so they came up with the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto very simply states that we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value. And then we go through these 4 this over that kind of statements where we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We value working software over comprehensive documentation. We value customer collaboration over the contract negotiation, and we value responding to change over following a plan. And it's really important to point out the distinction here that we use the word over, right? So they call this out to say that is while there's value on the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And a lot of folks who are a little resistant to kind of adopting an Agile mentality, they'll say things like, oh, well, you don't have a process, you just do everything all willy-nilly, or you don't document anything if you're doing Agile. And that's absolutely not true. It's just that given any kind of situation where we have to make a choice, we're always going to try to err on the side of the things on the left over the things on the right. Coming from a government background, things like contract negotiation and comprehensive documentation, those are non-starters. We have to have those things. So we can still do that in an Agile way, but if at the end of the day, we're always going to want to collaborate with our customer first and foremost. Then the more important part that I really try to focus on in my classes is the 12 principles of Agile, kind of like the second page of the manifesto. And I'm not going to read through all these right here today. You can pause this video if you're watching at home, or you can go check it out online. But these are really the guiding principles of what Agile is. Jessica can attest to this. She took the course last year. I really believe that Agile is a culture and it's a mentality. It's not a set of processes or tools that you have to memorize. And so it's really important to get these principles down and have a good understanding of them before you try to adopt any kind of Agile processes. So by adopting all these different Agile principles and kind of employing this culture, we come up with a way to get products out to our customer using a method we call minimum viable product. And it's important to understand that minimum viable product is about delivering some capability in the shortest time possible. And you have to understand that a capability means it has to do something. You have to help your customer solve a problem. So if we use the example that your customer wants you to build a car for them, delivering them a wheel does not help them solve the problem of traveling from point A to point B, but maybe delivering them a skateboard does. Now, if you look at the smiley faces on this image here, you'll kind of notice that the customer's maybe still not very happy because you gave them a skateboard. Well, of course they're not. They asked for a car and you gave them a skateboard. But every piece that you deliver along the way gives you a chance to learn things about that customer. This is from an article online I found about talking about minimum viable product, and in that example, they talk about giving the customer a blue skateboard, and when the customer's dissatisfied with it, they ask them, well, what's wrong with the skateboard? And the first thing they said is, it's blue. And you say, okay, well, what color would you like it? And they say red. Well, awesome. That's a great lesson for me to learn while I just have a tiny little skateboard before I go off and paint an entire car the wrong color. You'll also notice in the second example there, when we get to the motorcycle, the customer's pretty happy at that point, and they kind of talk about this in the article where they say, when you ask the customer what they like about the motorcycle, they say that they really love the way the wind feels in their face. And so you use that information to say, you know what, I'm going to give this customer a convertible instead of a coupe. And so at the end, you have a customer that's a lot more happy than they are in the first situation. But it's a building process to get them from dissatisfied to happy, and they get a little bit happier along the way, rather than a waterfall approach where they're just kind of upset until the very end, and then even at that, they may not be that happy. So how do we do this? Scrum is the most popular framework in Agile right now. I believe the last survey I saw was about 60 or 70% of organizations are using some form of Scrum as their framework for Agile. If you go through the 12 principles of Agile and you look at what Scrum is composed of as far as processes, it aligns very, very well. And so I'm going to give you just a really quick overview of what Scrum is, what it's not, and kind of how it works. So in Scrum, we're going to always start with a prioritized backlog of user stories. And we'll talk about what a user story is here in just a couple more slides. But in that backlog, the key is that it's prioritized. So we've identified the features that we want to build, and we've worked with our stakeholders and our customers to determine the order of importance for those stories. So when we start with that, the first thing we're going to do, the first ceremony we have in Scrum, is the sprint planning ceremony. So we will take the top items from that prioritized backlog, we will break them down into subtasks, we will kind of groom the stories, is a common way of referring to it, to make sure that they have enough information in them for the team to work on them. And then we will pull those into our sprint backlog, which is what we're going to work on for the next 1 to 4 weeks. So we go into this 1 to 4 week sprint cycle where it's an iteration, and every day we're going to have a daily stand-up on the team. A daily stand-up is not a status meeting. It's not a place for your project manager or your boss to check in on you. It's a way for the team to get together and discuss what they worked on yesterday, what they plan on working on today, and what things could get in the way of them finishing their task. So what roadblocks do I need help on removing? And it's a way for the team to kind of collaborate and work together to make sure that everything gets done in that sprint that was committed to during that sprint planning ceremony. Finally, at the end of that sprint cycle, we are going to take a potentially shippable product. Doesn't mean it's done, doesn't mean it's something a customer would want. I often talk about if you're starting a project from scratch, your first potentially shippable product might be a login screen. If that login screen doesn't go to anything useful, you're not going to put that out there for your customer. But the point is you could, because it's done. You have everything 100% done, it's tested, the code is ready to go. So then we have a sprint review ceremony where we demonstrate or kind of show our potentially shippable product to our customer, to our stakeholders, to everybody else on the team, on the project, and we kind of demonstrate what we have built over the last 1 to 4 weeks, and then we get feedback on that to make sure that it's the right thing. And if it's not, we go back and we make adjustments, and if it is, then we go back to the drawing board and we pull things in for the next sprint, but not before we have our sprint retrospective, which is a meeting where the team gets together and they discuss what went well and what didn't go well during that sprint, and they come up with ideas or hypotheses on what they could change during their next sprint to try and improve either their efficiency or the quality of the product or their communication within the team or with the customer. When we talk about who makes up a Scrum team, there's only 3 roles. We have the product owner, which basically in a nutshell decides what to build. We have the Scrum Master, who's responsible for how to work together. They kind of are the coach of the team. And then we have the team, which is their job is to figure out how to build it. If we dig into these roles just a little bit further, the product owner owns the product backlog. They work with the stakeholders and the team. They have the final authority on what gets worked. They're responsible to the stakeholders to set the priority. So oftentimes in an organization, you'll have multiple stakeholders. You may be building something for the finance team. You may be building something for the marketing team. It's the product owner's job to work with those two different stakeholders to figure out whose is a bigger priority and let the team know this is the thing you should work on next. And they're responsible to the team to keep the work stable, which means as soon as we start a sprint, don't come in and say, hey, you guys need to drop everything, now start working on this other thing that we didn't even talk about last week. As much as possible, we want to try and keep the work stable so the team can focus. When we get to the Scrum Master role, they own the agile process, right? They're not the team's boss. They're not in charge of assigning tasks or anything. They're responsible for the agile process. Their main job is to remove obstacles and impediments so that the team can focus on delivering value and getting work done. They shield the team from disruptions, so people coming by and asking all kinds of questions or asking you to make this one little change right here, even if it's not related to something you're working on. And they coach the team. That's primarily what the Scrum Master does in a nutshell. They facilitate that communication. So when you're having that team retrospective, they help draw out those things from maybe the quieter folks on the team that don't speak up as much to make sure that everybody has a voice and that the team gets comfortable with talking with each other and making sure they're all trying to get better. And they're an agent of change. And then finally, the Scrum team, they determine their velocity, which we'll get to here in one more slide. Together, they commit to achieve whatever their sprint goals are, so what they decide to do or agree that they can accomplish during sprint planning and what their objectives are. And they regularly demonstrate working code, so that's that sprint review at the end of the sprint. And they have to maintain a sustainable pace. You can't go 110% forever. So the Scrum team is important to determine what their velocity is and make sure that it's something that they can keep up with. And another important factor is that they're cross-functional. That doesn't mean that every person on the team has to know how to do every single thing. It means that your team has to be composed of members that are capable of doing everything your project needs. So you may have somebody who's primarily a tester, but they should probably be able to help do a peer review on some code from time to time. You may have somebody who primarily works on the front end, but they should be able to help out on the back end when they can, right? You have to have all the skills necessary on that team to get your project from start to finish. And then they work with the customers and the stakeholders. So those are the only three roles in Scrum by the textbook: product owner, Scrum Master, the team. Other people will try to add in things like business analyst or product analyst sometimes, or different various forms of stakeholders, but if you go by the book, it's just the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team. Now, a couple of the vocabulary words I used in there, such as user stories, I just want to touch on real fast because these are really commonly misunderstood concepts, and I just want to try and clear that up a little bit. So a user story is a different way of identifying a unit of work that needs to get done. So somebody might try to equate it to a task. And it's not just called a user story just because they wanted to give it some cool name that's not task. It really has a purpose. So with a user story, we identify as a certain user role, I want, can, am able to pick one of those action words, achieve this goal so that there's a reason for that. And user stories are meant to start conversations. They're not meant to tell the developer every single thing that they need to do on that task. They're meant to help them get a conversation started. Knowing who the user is helps them know who they should go talk to. Hopefully they have somebody at their disposal that they can reach out to that is in that role, and if not, they have somebody that's a proxy that maybe used to do that role or can reach out to somebody who does that role so they can start that conversation. And user stories can start off large and they can be broken down into smaller stories as the project goes on. So when you start a project, you may only have a handful of stories that you identify as large features, but as the team gets ready to work those through the sprint planning ceremonies, they identify that, you know what, this is a really big piece of work, so let's turn this into a series of smaller stories. Now when we get to doing our user stories and trying to determine our velocity or how much work we can achieve in a sprint, we have to estimate that. And estimating is pretty hard because humans are pretty bad at estimating things in general. We're a lot better at relative sizing of things. So if I ask somebody how far it is from here to Chicago and how far it is from here to New York, everybody's going to be off by maybe even an order of magnitude. But a lot of people would probably tell me that it's twice as far to New York as it is to Chicago, and that's about within 15% of being accurate. So when we talk about that, we want to identify that it's much better to be approximately correct than it is to be precisely wrong. So that's what we want to focus on with estimating. And to help us do that, we try to stick to the Fibonacci scale, and we use story points to estimate our user stories so that we're not tying them to specific hours. If I use specific numbers, people latch on to those. If I say this task is going to take me 3.5 hours and I get to 4 hours, you better believe somebody's going to be saying, hey, I thought you said that was only going to take 3.5 hours. Why are you still working on it? If I use story points, it's a little more nebulous, and you're going to be over sometimes, you're going to be under sometimes, but in the long run, it balances out and you get a much more predictable velocity for your team. One of the other advantages to story points is that they're a little bit abstract from the team's skill. So it doesn't matter who works the story, the point value still should hold true for a team that is relatively stable and has the same folks working on it for a prolonged period of time. So one example that I got from Mike Cohn, who's a really big Scrum body of knowledge. He's been in the world doing this for a long time. That's where I got my CSM and my CSPO. During one of his classes, he kind of used this analogy that I've modified a little bit, where we talk about if we were just estimating how long it's going to take us to walk somewhere. If I have a person starting here at point A and they're going to walk to this schoolhouse and it's 1 unit away, we can identify that that's how far away that thing is. If I have a building over here to the other direction that's 2 units away, it doesn't matter how fast that person walks or runs. The second one is still 2 units away, and so if they're a little bit slower walker, it's still going to take them twice as long, rather than if they're the fast walker. And so it's easy to identify stories like that are things the team is pretty comfortable with and they've done before and they have a lot of experience with. It's easy to say, yeah, that's just a thing we have to set up when we build this new thing. Like, we've done that. We know that this is X story points. Now, where it gets a little trickier is when we throw in uncertainty. So this building here is also 1 unit away. However, there's a railroad track in the middle blocking our path, and we don't know when the train is going to come by, and we don't know how long that train takes. So this is where we may pad our story points a little bit for uncertainty. So this could be things like, I'm pretty sure that's a 1-line change in the code, but I've never touched that code, so I don't know. It might be bigger. Or I will be able to get that done so long as I have this thing available to me, but it's outside of my control, so I don't know if that thing's going to be available. So those kind of things maybe make you bump that number up to add that risk in there that this may take a little bit longer. The other thing that's sort of semi-related is kind of complexity. So again, I've got this haunted house here, but it's on the other side of this spooky forest, and I don't really know how to get through there. It's kind of dark and it's kind of murky, and it's not that far away, but I really don't know exactly how to get through there. So maybe I have a really large code base that I've got to dig through to try and find what it is I'm looking for. So again, that's only 1 unit away, but maybe that's a 2 or 3 story point thing because I know it's very complex and I just don't know what it's going to take to get it done. And that is Agile in Scrum in a really small nutshell. So if you're interested in learning more, we have Agile 101 classes continuing at Metro Community College starting up in January. If you go to the mcc.edu site, you can do a search for Agile 101 and find those classes to sign up. And it's really a principles-based primer to get you the foundation you need to understand what Agile is and how to adopt it.
All right, it's so sad to say goodbye, but this is actually our last episode of Season 1. But the fun doesn't stop here. We're actually getting ready for our Season 2, and we want to involve you at home. Whether you're near Omaha, you're in Lincoln, Des Moines, wherever you are, we want to add you to our show. So go ahead and like us, add us, tell us what you're doing to help the STEM pipeline in your community. And we'll see you in Season 2.